Hikers slash park rangers of Reddit, what is the scariest slash creepiest thing that you have seen in the woods? A few years ago my brother and I were camping in Colorado. He heard a twig snap somewhere nearby, and he wakes me up. We scan with our headlamps and see a huge pair of eyes staring at us through some willows. I figured it must be a bear. It kept staring at us for 5 minutes until we turned off the lights. We were going to move camp back towards some other groups. All of a sudden a massive moose comes charging out of the willows. Luckily it veered off before it collided with our tent. Another time I was hiking a trail I hike regularly with my dog, but it was totally deserted because of some rain. She was ahead of me maybe 20 yards when she comes to a dead stop, and beelines it back down the trail, completely ignoring my calls. As I chase her I notice an unmistakable mountain lion print. Smart dog. Dog doesn't have to outrun the mountain lion, it just has to outrun you. Told this story once before. The Trailside Killer. In Northern California, late 70s. Hiking with a friend, came across him at a rock outcropping on Mount Tam. He gave off a very discomforting vibe and we didn't hang around. We both independently recognized him when he was finally captured a few years later and his picture was in the paper. If I'd been with my girlfriend, we might not be alive. I was hiking in a national forest with my wife and my dog. The first couple's miles of trail led to a waterfall and swimming hole, so it was fairly well populated with people. We decided to hike past the waterfall, which involved a bit of a climb, enough at least to keep most people from going past the waterfall. We hiked another mile or two without seeing a single person. This whole time my dog was having a great time, happy to be in the woods and happy to walk 30 miles if we let her. Suddenly, in a particularly dense part of the trail, she stopped suddenly and stared straight ahead. She absolutely would not move another inch forward. We stopped and listened but couldn't hear or see anything unusual. The dog, though, started whining and trying to pull us on the leash back up the trail towards the swimming hole. I had never before or since seen my dog act this way, but I believe she was legitimately afraid of whatever was ahead of us. Maybe there was a bear on the trail, or a coyote, or maybe a serial killer was hiding in the woods. I'll never know, because we listened to our dog and decided to jeetfo as fast as we could. Who knows, maybe we avoided some gruesome death deep in the woods. Always listen to your dog. I was out with mine one time in a small park near our house. We passed a guy who looked out of place going the opposite direction. We headed up a trail, and all of a sudden the guy was behind me. My dog cut up out of the trail back into the neighborhood next to it. He never does that, he'd much rather stay on a trail. But he knew something about that guy didn't sit right and he got us out of there. I was in archaeological field school. Living in a tent for 6 weeks at 7,500 feet and the closest paved road was 10 miles away. One night I woke to a huffing slash snorting kinda sound right outside my tent. Next thing I know, whatever it was bumping my head. I froze for a second. Then on pure instinct I did an overhead punch. Definitely felt contact. Whatever it was went away. This was on US Forest Service grazing land, so it could have been a cow with insomnia, but it could have been a mountain lion or black bear. Wasn't even tempted to go out and see what it was. I preferred the safety of my tent. Didn't see, but heard. My husband and I were hiking in a state park on the East Coast. It was midday during the work week, so we maybe encountered 2 other people the 3 hours we were out and about. The only sounds we heard were from ourselves, our dog and some birds slash animals. All of the sudden, I started hearing mild chanting. I asked my husband if he heard it too and he nodded but signaled for me to be quiet. My dog's ears were at full alert and the hair on his back was standing straight up. We continued walking and the noises turned into full-blown monk chanting. Think Halo Gregorian chant. It was clear as day. Like I was standing right next to a speaker. To make myself feel better, I convinced myself some teens were hiding down somewhere playing it on their phones. After 5 minutes of hearing it, it disappeared and we barely spoke a word the last 3 miles back. Still creeps me out. I've shared this before. A pack of dogs ran up on my wife and I while hiking out of the Grand Canyon at about 3 a.m. Very dark outside. Her and I had headlamps. We stopped, they stopped. All I saw was a bunch of glowing eyes and bushy-tailed silhouettes. After a beat I realized they were working dogs for the reservation, so I just went, "Hey puppers," in the same voice I use for my dog, and they immediately went on their way. Ended up not being dangerous really, but I almost shat myself. Hey, puppers. Pack of savage dogs. Oh shit, this motherfucker's crazy. He's probably gonna tell us we're good boys and give us each our own Instagram account. Let's bounce. I'd rub all the bellies. Was on a camping trip in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, and we woke up in the middle of the night to this incredibly loud slap and a splash out in the middle of the lake. Sound carries really well across water. Our first fear was that someone was shooting at us, and that was absolutely terrifying. Then we heard it again a bit closer, and one of the guides realized it was a fucking beaver slapping its tail on the water before it dove below. I worked as a tree planter in northern Ontario, living in tents in very remote parts of the forest, like hours away from civilization, only accessible by logging roads. Strangest was from a fellow planter who found a backpack in the middle of his area with shoes, clothes, a wallet with a school ID and a film camera. How it ended up there is a total mystery, because this is no place for hiking or camping. Scariest for myself was waking up to my tent vestibule collapsed and a large bear claw rip which I apparently slept through. As well as turning a corner to a large wolf about 10 feet away. And returning to a spot I'd planted about 5 minutes earlier to fresh mama bear and cub prints. Realizing a bear family had sauntered behind me while my back was turned was very unsettling, because you do not want to fuck with a bear and her cubs. Canadian wildlife is scary, yo. It was 3 a.m. and everyone was KO'd in their tents. I was awoken by the sound of someone, or something, walking around my tent. I hear a distant, but blood-curdling scream. For the next 30 minutes, I see a light waving around outside. I thought about going out to investigate but didn't want to die. It took me a few hours to fall asleep. The next day, it turns out a cub was poking around our campsite. My friend was hammock camping, which probably piqued the cub's curiosity. It poked a claw through the hammock and left a sizable gash on his elbow. My friend said he didn't fall asleep for 2 hours and kept shining his flashlight around in case the cub returned with its mother or something. That happened about 6 feet away from me. I went running through a trail near my house one afternoon, headphones in and my mind elsewhere, just because I knew the path really well. I came around a bend, and through the gap in the trees about 20 feet in front of me, I locked eyes with a dead and rotting deer. Somehow, it was postured in a way that made it look as though the corpse was staring through me. I turned around and bolted out as fast as I possibly could. Bears were just chilling out in our campsite in New Mexico in the middle of the night, making sounds. One random guy, wasn't in our group, literally just gets out, grabs a stick and chases them out while screaming, "Man, that was wild." Random guy was Russian. I was walking with my family in the woods above our house, and our little dachshund puppy was sprinting up and down the trail between us, having the time of her life. After a while she caught the scent of something and shot off the trail into the undergrowth. We called for her, but her interest was fixed on something away from the path, through the undergrowth. After squeezing past some trees and bushes, I followed her to a rocky overhang. She was barking and barking at something laying in the soft dirt. At first I thought it was a bundle of half-buried clothes, then I saw the patch of blonde hair sticking out the soil at one end and realized what I was looking at. There had been a lot of rain recently and it had washed some of the soil away from a recently dug shallow grave. Freaked out, I grabbed my dog and backed up back to the trail. After a much faster hike home, the rest of the morning was spent talking to the police, then talking to homicide. I never found out what happened. Surrounded by meth heads in an Australian national park at night, with no signal. They stopped us in our car at the gate. Maybe 5 of them hopped out and surrounded the car, asked us if we knew where they could get any. I had my big Becca BK knife by my side. Thankfully they left.